A neutral convener is an individual or an organization that brings together a diverse range of stakeholders around a complex issue. And the goal is to create an environment where all sides of the table can be heard and where all sides of the table feel included. And you often see these approaches used in UN convenings, in diplomatic proceedings, and often in work that has to do with the environment, climate, human health, or human rights. Our foray into neutral convening began 7 years ago when we brought C-suite executives, brand executives, the petrochemical industry, environmental NGOs, to go see the waste crisis firsthand in the Sargasso Sea. And ever since then, we've been able to convene around some of the most complex and challenging issues of the waste crisis, including the UN Global Plastics Treaty, alternative materials, advanced chemical and molecular recycling, reuse and refill, and extended producer responsibility. So this work allows multi-stakeholder experts, excuse me, an opportunity to uncover assumptions, learn, and build trust, which is what we think is necessary for collaboration. And we also think that Sea Change is an incredibly perfect opportunity to do that because, I mean, just look around. It's beautiful, it's open, and it's built to have the kind of candid conversations that we think are necessary for collaboration and momentum. Right, so I see the emphasis on practical because I'm sure what I just said sounded a bit pie in the sky, but the truth is there really are practical methods. And one of the first methods is by setting the scene. So whenever we have a convening, we always start by setting ground rules for respect. And we also employ diplomatic principles like Chatham House Rule, which allows for participants to talk about what was discussed and what was learned, but not who said it. In our sessions, some of the approaches include guided Q&A, which of course is where you bring together experts to discuss a specific topic. And it gives participants to ask an opportunity to ask attributed or unattributed questions. We also do experiential learning, and this is our show, don't tell approach. And this is where we take individuals on site visits and technical deep dives to go see their challenges through a new lens. And we've been able to do these types of trips everywhere from Vancouver to Maine to Lithuania. And we also do ecosystem mapping. And so this is where we allow stakeholders to examine their relationships within a wider system. And what this exercise allows us to do is have conversations around what their pain points are in the system, what's working for them in the system, and ultimately tends to uncover what really brings them to the table. Well, it matters because without these types of forums, these pressure points can turn to either escalation or result in gridlock. And so neutral convening matters because of who it's able to bring to the table. I'm going to give an example. So in the complex world of extended producer responsibility for packaging, the cost of recovering and recycling materials is shifted to producers and sometimes brands, retailers. And at its core, EPR for packaging is intended to improve the system's capacity to handle the waste that we're putting into it. But it also has very real implications for the organizations that are handling our waste and the organizations that we purchase our goods from. And so our approach is to bring together the legislators behind past policies in the US, as well as future policies, and also all parts of the value chain, from material producers to haulers or collectors to recyclers, so that we can have candid conversations about what's working for them and what's not working, and ultimately what we just don't know yet without any sort of personal or professional recourse. And I'm sure that you can imagine that these conversations get uncomfortable sometimes. But the truth is that we hope that this discomfort is a signal that we're avoiding gridlock and that we are navigating escalation. We see discomfort not as a failure. Discomfort is a signal. And it's usually a signal that we're encountering an entrenched assumption or we're encountering new information. And so we always try to reframe discomfort as curiosity. And the goal is never to force consensus or force agreement. The goal is to allow stakeholders to uncover and understand what's driving another stakeholder's perspectives, to understand what they might need to know more about, and to understand who they might want to continue the conversation with. And so the structures that neutral conveners are placing around some of these pressure points is really just the scaffolding for the real experts in the room to continue to do the hard work. Well, it's critical now because we're seeing momentum. 7 states in the US have EPR for packaging, 10 have recycling refund, and we see a suite of states interested in this policy for the 2026 and 27 legislative sessions, which are upcoming. And we have around 20 of those legislators in the room with us as we speak. And experts do think that this momentum is going to continue because what we've come to understand is that circular policies are not simply driven by a passion for sustainability. It's driven because at the state level, municipalities and sometimes private operators are responsible for waste management. And so as the amount of waste entering our system increases, our infrastructure is strained. So for example, landfills are reaching capacity and people are paying more for municipal services. So as stakeholders are acknowledging this momentum, we're starting to hear a common theme. And that common theme is that people want an opportunity to sit down and unpack how these circular policies really impact all of the stakeholders in this very complex ecosystem, so that legislators can then understand what they want to bring to 2026 and 27. And that's what neutral conveners are for. We recently took a multi-stakeholder delegation to go see circular policies in action in Montreal, Quebec. And we don't advocate for any specific system, but this is an opportunity to understand the structure and understand learning that we can take to the US. And on this recent trip, a legislator had the opportunity to speak to the head of a producer responsibility organization in Quebec, head of a producer responsibility organization in the United States, and management of a material recovery facility in Montreal. And I have to synthesize, of course, and anonymize a bit what this legislator said, so bear with me, but I think it gives an important point. This legislator said, I have been negotiating this legislation for months. And I've had after two frank conversations here, I've come to understand that it's not the legislation itself that I'm getting pushback on. It's the way that we're framing producer responsibility within the legislation that might not even be technically viable in our state, and I'm leaving with a different approach. And so these types of forums allow all stakeholders to step out of political silos and really understand the context of what's driving another stakeholder's frustration, because truthfully, we are all drinking from the fire hose a bit as we're adapting these circular policies. Change is the act of becoming different. And so for us, it's really about creating the conditions to think differently. And to us, that can look like a legislator sitting down with another legislator and the head of a brand and the head of a recycling organization and having the space to have curiosity-led conversations. And change, we don't believe, should be driven by one group, quote unquote, winning, of course. Change should be driven by having the opportunity to examine new information and to ask questions. And so I just want to say thank you to See Change and all of the wonderful people here, because you have created beautiful conditions to think differently. And I also want to thank everyone in our track, in all of the tracks, for being willing to engage in the conditions to think differently, because this is really what drives lasting momentum and what drives lasting impact.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.